Saint Joan of Arc, the maiden who obeyed God. France was dying. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, like a body weakened by years of bleeding. Fields lay burned and empty. Villages were silent. Churches stood scarred by war, their bells cracked, their prayers unanswered. Kings argued while armies retreated. The poor suffered while the powerful calculated. The 100 Years' War had torn the soul out of a nation, and in that darkness, God did something unexpected. He did not speak to a general. He did not speak to a bishop. He did not speak to a king. He spoke to a girl. Her name was Joan. She was born around the year 1412 in the small village of Domremy, tucked into the northeastern countryside of France. It was a place of fields and forests, of quiet labor and simple faith. Joan's world was small: sheep to tend, chores to finish, prayers to memorize. Her father, Jacques d'Arc, worked the land. Her mother, Isabelle Romay, taught her children to love God, to honor the church, and to fear sin more than death. Joan could not read. She would never learn to write. But she knew the creed. She knew the Lord's Prayer. She knew the sound of church bells calling the faithful home. She loved God with the uncomplicated love of a child, sincere, trusting, and whole. Later, witnesses would testify that Joan was different, not loud, not proud, not rebellious. She avoided coarse language. She avoided gossip. She avoided dances that led to temptation. She preferred prayer to play, silence to noise, service to attention. She was not raised to be a hero. She was raised to be faithful. And faith, when tested, becomes something dangerous to the world. Joan was about 13 years old when it happened. She was in her father's garden, surrounded by sunlight and stillness, when the air changed. The world did not disappear, but something greater entered it. A light, not blinding, but alive, filled the space around her. And then she heard a voice. It was not frightening. It was not confusing. It was calm, strong, and unmistakably real. The voice told her to be good, to go to church, to trust God. At first, Joan thought little of it. She was young. She said nothing. But the voice returned, and with it came others. She would later say that she recognized them as Saint Michael the Archangel, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret of Antioch. They did not flatter her. They did not promise comfort. They did not explain everything. They gave her a command. France must be saved. The rightful king must be crowned. And Joan must go. Fear entered her heart immediately. She was a peasant. She was a child. She was a woman. She had no weapon, no training, no authority. And yet, the voices did not fade. Night after night, she prayed. She begged God to choose someone else, someone older, someone stronger, someone worthy. But the answer did not change. God was not asking for her strength. He was asking for her obedience. This was Joan's first battle, and perhaps her hardest. Not against English soldiers, but against doubt, against fear, against the crushing weight of knowing that obedience would cost her everything. She later said that she wept often, that she trembled, that she resisted. But she also said this: I would rather die than do something I know to be a sin. And disobedience to God, for Joan, would have been the greatest sin of all. As the years passed, the situation in France grew desperate. The English tightened their grip. The city of Orléans stood on the edge of collapse. If it fell, the road to total conquest would open. The voices grew urgent. You must go. Joan was 16. She finally told her parents. They were horrified. They tried to stop her. They forbade her. They threatened to drown her if she left. But Joan did not rebel. She prayed. And then she went. Her journey took her to the fortified town of Vaucouleurs, where she asked to see the local commander. She told him she had been sent by God. He laughed. He dismissed her. He sent her home. She returned. Again and again, she endured mockery, insults, suspicion. She was called mad, delusional, possessed. She did not respond with anger. She waited. Eventually, the commander relented. Not because he believed her, but because he feared ignoring her might be worse. Joan cut her hair short and dressed in simple men's clothing for safety, not to reject her womanhood, but to protect her purity on the road. Even this decision would later be twisted and used against her. But Joan did not think about later. She thought about obedience. She traveled through enemy territory to Chinon, where the uncrowned king of France, Charles, held court. He decided to test her. He hid among his courtiers, dressed as a nobleman, while another sat upon the throne. Joan entered the hall. She did not hesitate. She walked straight past the false king, past the nobles, past the whispers, and knelt before Charles. "Gentle Dauphin," she said, "I am sent by God to give you your kingdom." No one had told her who he was. No one had pointed him out. The room fell silent. Something ancient stirred. Not pride, but fear. Because when God speaks clearly, even kings feel small. Charles tested her further. He questioned her. He sent her to theologians and clergy. They examined her faith, her morals, her mind. They found no heresy. They found no deception. They found a girl whose confidence did not come from herself. It came from God. And so, against reason, against custom, against every rule of war and society, Joan of Arc was given armor. She asked not for a sword, but for a banner, white, bearing the names of Jesus and Mary. She said she preferred it, because she loved it 40 times more than any weapon. And when she rode toward Orléans, she did not promise victory. She promised obedience. When Joan arrived at Orléans, she did not find an army ready for victory. She found men who were tired, hungry, cynical. They had fought for years and lost too much to believe easily anymore. Many had buried brothers. Some had buried sons. Hope had become dangerous, something you avoided, so it wouldn't break your heart again. And then they saw her, a teenage girl in white armor. No sword raised, no command shouted, only a banner lifted high, catching the wind. At first, they laughed, but laughter fades when conviction does not. Joan spoke to them plainly. She told them to stop swearing, to go to confession, to attend Mass, to remember that God was not a distant observer, but the Lord of history. Some mocked her, others listened, and something changed. It was not strategy. It was not numbers. It was spirit. For the first time in years, the soldiers believed that God had not abandoned France. Joan herself prayed constantly. Before battle, during battle, after battle. She fasted. She confessed often. She begged the soldiers not to fight out of hatred, but out of duty. She did not claim victory came from her. She said it came from God, and that obedience was the price. The siege of Orléans was brutal. The English fortifications surrounded the city like a tightening fist. Every attempt to break through had failed. Joan insisted they attack. The commanders hesitated. They had plans. They had calculations. They had reasons. Joan listened. Then she said quietly, "You have waited long enough." She rode with the troops, banner raised, not behind them, not above them, but among them. Arrows flew. Stones shattered shields. Men fell. And then it happened. An arrow struck Joan in the shoulder, piercing through armor and flesh. She fell from her horse. A cry went up. The soldiers froze. For a moment, hope seemed to die again. Joan lay on the ground, blood soaking into the dirt. Pain surged through her body. She wept, not from fear, but from the sting of the wound. Then she prayed. She pulled the arrow out with her own hands. No surgeon, no delay, no retreat. She rose, lifted her banner, and returned to the fight. The soldiers followed. That day, the English defenses began to collapse. Within days, Orléans was freed. Church bells rang. People wept in the streets. A city that had prepared for death tasted life again. Joan did not celebrate. She knelt. Victory, she believed, was not something you claimed. It was something you thanked God for. Word spread quickly. The girl was not mad. She was not weak. And she was not afraid. But success brings temptation. Pride whispers when applause grows loud. Power seduces when authority comes easily. Joan was suddenly famous. People bowed. Soldiers deferred. Nobles praised. Joan resisted all of it. She wore the same simple clothes beneath her armor. She ate little. She prayed more. She corrected soldiers who sinned and forgave those who mocked her. When praised, she deflected it. When doubted, she endured it. She said, "I am not afraid. I was born for this." But what she meant was this: she was born to obey. After Orléans, Joan urged the Dauphin to go to Reims, deep into enemy-held territory, to be crowned King of France. It was madness by military standards, but Joan insisted. "God wills it," she said. The journey was dangerous. Cities could have closed their gates. Armies could have crushed them. Instead, doors opened. One by one, towns surrendered without battle. It was not Joan's sword they feared. It was God's will they sensed. On July 17th, 1429, Charles was crowned King Charles VII in the Cathedral of Reims. As the crown was placed upon his head, Joan stood nearby, banner in hand, tears streaming down her face. She had fulfilled what God asked. She asked to go home. But the war was not over, and neither was her cross. In the months that followed, the tide turned again. Politics crept back in. Advisors whispered. Fear returned to men who had once trusted completely. Joan's counsel was ignored. She was sent on missions without support. Promises were broken. Loyalty weakened. Then came the capture. In 1430, during a skirmish near Compiègne, Joan was thrown from her horse. The gates closed behind her. Burgundian soldiers seized her and dragged her away. She was sold. Like an object, like a weapon, like a threat. The English wanted her destroyed, not just killed, but discredited. If Joan was proven a heretic, then everything she had done would be undone. They did not want to burn her body alone. They wanted to burn her truth. Joan was imprisoned in chains. She was guarded by men who mocked her, threatened her, humiliated her. She was denied Mass, denied confession, denied the comfort of the church she loved. Still, she prayed. She said she trusted God, even if the church on earth failed her. The trial that followed was illegal, cruel, and predetermined. Learned men questioned an illiterate girl for hours on end, searching for contradiction, hoping to trap her. They asked her if she knew she was in God's grace. Joan answered without hesitation. "If I am not," she said, "may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there." Even her judges fell silent. They could not break her faith. So they condemned her. On May 30th, 1431, at 19 years old, Joan was led to the stake in Rouen. She asked for a cross. A soldier made one from a stick. A priest held another before her eyes. As the fire rose, Joan cried out the name of Jesus, again and again. Witnesses said she died calling on Christ. After the flames died, the executioner stared into the ashes and whispered in terror, "We have burned a saint." Joan's body was gone. Her enemies believed that fire had erased her. But fire does not erase what God has written. In the years that followed her death, something unexpected happened. The war did not end in England's favor. France did not collapse. Instead, slowly, painfully, the tide turned. The same King Joan had helped crown reclaimed territory after territory. The English were driven back. The nation survived. And with survival came memory. People began to ask questions. The whispers grew louder. How could a heretic have lived such a life? How could a liar have spoken with such clarity? How could a condemned girl have left behind a France that still stood? 25 years after her execution, the church reopened her case. Witnesses came forward, soldiers who had fought beside her, villagers who had known her as a child, priests who had examined her faith. They spoke not of madness, but of holiness, not of rebellion, but of obedience, not of pride, but of humility. The trial that had condemned her was declared invalid. Every charge was overturned. Joan of Arc was formally declared innocent. What fire could not destroy, truth restored. But Joan's story did not end with her vindication. It was only beginning. In the centuries that followed, devotion to Joan spread quietly at first, then irresistibly. Farmers prayed to her. Soldiers invoked her courage. Prisoners remembered her chains. Young women saw in her a reflection of purity, strength, and unwavering faith. Stories began to circulate, not legends of conquest, but moments of grace. There were accounts of soldiers who prayed to Joan before battle and returned alive when all seemed lost. Prisoners claimed that in their darkest nights, when hope collapsed under the weight of despair, they felt her presence, not as a warrior, but as a companion who understood fear and endured it with faith. In one such story, a young man condemned unjustly to death prayed desperately to Joan, begging for courage rather than escape. On the morning of his execution, new evidence came forward. His sentence was overturned. He lived, not to glorify chance, but to dedicate his life to God. In another account, a woman crushed by shame and failure prayed to Joan, asking how a person could rise after being humiliated before the world. The answer did not come as words, but as peace. The woman later said that Joan's life taught her that disgrace endured in obedience becomes glory in heaven. Joan did not perform miracles to impress. Her greatest miracle was example. She showed the world that fear can be transformed into courage when surrendered to God. That weakness becomes strength when obedience replaces pride. That silence endured with faith speaks louder than any shout of rebellion. In 1920, nearly 500 years after her death, the Church formally declared what the faithful had long believed. Joan of Arc was canonized a saint. She was named the patron saint of France, but not only of a nation. She became the patron of soldiers who must act without hatred, of prisoners who suffer injustice, of those mocked for their faith, of young people asked to carry burdens too heavy for their years. She became the patron of those who feel unworthy, yet obedient. Joan's life confronts us gently, but relentlessly. She was not fearless. She was afraid, and she obeyed anyway. She was not powerful. She was weak, and trusted God anyway. She was not honored. She was humiliated, and loved anyway. This is the path of the cross. Joan never sought suffering. She did not desire martyrdom. She wanted to return home. She wanted peace. But when obedience led her into fire, she did not run. She teaches us that the Christian life is not about choosing the easiest path, but the faithful one. That carrying our cross does not mean understanding it, only trusting the one who walks beside us. Each of us carries something heavy: fear, shame, loneliness, failure, a past we cannot undo. Joan reminds us that none of these disqualify us from holiness. They prepare us for it. Her voices told her to be faithful. The Gospel tells us the same. And if a teenage girl, unarmed, untrained, condemned by the powerful, could change the course of history by saying yes to God, then perhaps our own obedience, however small it seems, matters more than we imagine. Joan of Arc did not conquer France. She surrendered to God. And through that surrender, a nation was saved, and souls were inspired for generations. Her fire did not consume her. It became a light. She was 15 years old when God spoke to her. Not in a palace, not in a cathedral, but in a quiet field, while the world was at war. She could not read. She had no sword. She had no army. And yet kings would listen to her. Armies would follow her. And enemies would fear her. She did not fight for power. She did not seek glory. She obeyed God. That obedience would crown a king, save a nation, and lead her to the fire at 19 years old. This is not the story of a warrior. It is the story of a soul who carried her cross and changed history forever. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.